and welcome back to the Matt Brown Podcast. We'll be back right after this.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe. It's the perfect time of year to take a break on their spacious patio, featuring craft beer, espresso drinks, snacks, meals, and more. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
Welcome back, London. It's been a hot summer. We've had 5 heat waves right here in London. We, along with the rest of Ontario and Canada, are experiencing drought, forest fires. They're raging right across the country, and very often smoke from those fires is traveling hundreds of kilometers through the air to hang over our city. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We are lucky to have Carol Dyck with us to discuss heat domes, heat waves, forest fires, and the consequences of climate change that are happening right now. Carol is also going to talk about what kind of action our London City Council is taking, plus what she thinks they should be doing more of. Carol is a doctoral student in the Faculty of Law at Western. She specializes in international environmental law as well as marine law. She has previously sat on the boards of the London Environmental Network and the Thames Talbot Land Trust. She has also served on the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee for the City of London. You've probably seen Carol's name in the news and on signs right across London because Carol ran as a candidate for the Green Party, both provincially and federally, get this, in 2015, 2018, 2019, 2022, and 2025. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're thrilled that you're here. We're going to be covering a lot of ground over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. This podcast is really all about London and maybe some other stuff. And today, that's happening. We're going to talk about London, but what's happening in London with regard to climate is happening in Ontario, Canada, and around the world. So just to provide some context, here in London, over the course of the past 2 months, we've had 5 heat waves, so a higher number of heat waves than average. It's having real impacts on people's health. It's having impacts on business. It's affecting the economy. And in fact, it's actually having an effect on our power. There have been 5 power outages that have been directly attributed to climate change, to these heat waves that we're experiencing. And that means that anywhere between hundreds, on some occasions, to many thousands of residents and businesses are without power for extended period of times. So what's going on?
So what's happening is that we are obviously experiencing a massive heat on a global scale across the planet. And we are seeing rising temperatures year after year. And we're hitting new highs constantly in our temperatures. And what that means on a local level is that people are really having to draw on the power system, mainly for air conditioning, cooling. If you imagine grocery stores, places like that, that need to keep things cool. It is a huge burden on our power system. And for that reason, we start having these power outages. Now, as inconvenient as it is also a huge health issue and a massive risk because you need that air conditioning to stay cool. And once you don't have it, people who are much more vulnerable, like our seniors, like children, like people that have chronic illness, they are now at huge risk for any heat stroke and even death. In 2021, there was the huge heat dome in British Columbia, and 619 people lost their lives.
619 people lost their lives?
Yes, and that was in 1 week. And we really need to sit up and take notice of that, particularly in London, because as you said, we've had these multiple high heat events. And there are a lot of people that are at risk in London. And, I just listened to your podcast with Chris Moss, and we're talking about the 2,000 people that are homeless in London. They're at much higher risk for illness and death because of the heat problem. And, we have this winter response that we talk about all the time.
Well, I hope we do. It seems like council begins to plan these winter responses in midwinter. So hopefully there's a response that's coming up, but sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yes, hopefully. But what I do find that we have a serious lack of is thinking about, okay, well, what is our summer response? What is our heat response?
Right,
Because
of
heat
course.
is deadly.
Right.
Yes. I mean, even just recently, I believe it was in 2022, it was almost 73,000 people that died across Europe because of a massive heat event. That is an enormous number. And they find that it's particularly obviously seniors and children, people that are unhoused, but it's also people with underlying health issues. And for London, this is important because they're finding that it's people who are suffering from mental illness or schizophrenia or other health issues. And often those can be tied with people that are unhoused. And so this makes an even greater risk for our London community and the people that are there.
Wow, I think that your comments there really drive home that this isn't something that's going to happen in the future, that this isn't something that's going to have a negative effect on the next generation or the generation after that. There are some serious consequences and serious negative effects that are happening right now.
Yes, absolutely, right now. And they're even showing in studies that right now there is an increase in gender-based violence and domestic violence that is associated with climate change and rising temperatures. Peggy Sattler, who is currently one of the MPPs that's trying to push for recognizing domestic and gender-based violence as an epidemic, we are seeing that climate change is affecting that. And so we have to think on a grander scale that this is a problem that we're witnessing across the province, and it will only get worse as we see climate change get worse over the coming years.
So it's not just creating environmental challenges, it's creating social challenges that are quite serious, and it's creating health challenges for us that are quite serious as well.
Absolutely. And that all ties into economic issues. So, one of the problems that we're seeing, of course, is that when you have rising temperatures or you have the smoke, this affects people's health. And that means that you're going to see a massive increase in people visiting our hospitals. And so there's that huge economic cost as well of trying to care for people that are the most vulnerable, that are affected by the smoke and the heat. So it's not just the businesses, the social cost has an economic cost as well. And I think people often think of environmental issues as solely environmental
Mhm.
issues and solving the problem as sort of a nice to have. Like we'll do that when we have a chance because we are dealing with these economic issues or we're dealing with this issue without actually recognizing that it's all interlinked, it's all tied. And if you are having problems with your environment at its core, it is going to affect every aspect of our lives and our daily lives. It will affect it, whether it's our power going out, whether it's illness, whether it is the air that we're breathing. This is all interconnected and it's going to have long-term effects. I mean, they're even showing that smoke inhalation is linked to dementia. Well, we already see rising rates of dementia, and now we have this situation across the country where there is increased levels of smoke in the air that we breathe. At the moment, I am surrounded by smoke where I am. There
And
is
I
a
am
mass,
too. I'm here in London, and
yeah.
Carol is in British Columbia.
So there is a massive fire right now in Port Alberni, the largest that has ever been seen on Vancouver Island. And we woke up at 4 a.m. to extreme smoke. You cannot go outside right now. It's impossible. You can't breathe. And for those people that have asthma or any kind of underlying issue, this is an absolutely urgent matter.
Absolutely. And in fact, Carol, sorry to interrupt, but in London right now, we're surrounded by smoke. As I look out the window, I can see almost a fog-like appearance over the forest city, over the trees that I can see. And the fires that are occurring in Ontario that are affecting London are, in the near north, in the Kawarthas, and then also in Ontario's north and in Quebec. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away from where we are, but it's affecting the air quality here in London. In fact, last week, I think I read somewhere that the air quality in London, Ontario was one of the worst levels of air quality anywhere on the planet. And I was shocked.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Although right now, breathing the air that I'm currently breathing, I imagine it's a little bit worse. We're in the red zone for worst.
And so let's talk about forest fires then. So you've got forest fires raging where you are, right across the country. We've got forest fires here in Ontario and in Quebec. Um, what's going on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, this is all a result, again, of climate change. And I'm not going to debate the science on that. You often hear people that will push back and say, oh, no, they're caused by humans, or this is just natural. No. The fires that we are experiencing now are way worse than they ever were in the past, in size, in duration. And it is because we are experiencing extreme drought across the whole country. So the one that started in Port Alberni, it's because right now there is extreme drought. These have like a huge, huge impact in area. There's of course the social cost. It is, I personally have had family members of mine who've had to evacuate because of forest fires, and they did not know if they were going to come back to their
Can
homes.
you imagine how that would feel? I mean, you know how it feels, but I wonder if our listeners can just imagine for a minute, if they haven't experienced that, how that would feel to leave your home and not know if you're going to be able to come back.
And you've had to leave your pets, and you don't know if you're coming back to pets that will be alive or not. And there is a huge amount of work that has been going into studying the psychological effects of that. And they're showing there's a lot of people that have post-traumatic stress disorder because of it, or extreme amounts of depression, because you've lost everything potentially, or you lived through the potential of losing everything. And I don't think people realize sometimes that when you evacuate, you're not just evacuating for a day or two. Sometimes you're evacuating for a month while they're trying to battle these forest fires. It's really, and being surrounded by the smoke and not being able to see the sky and not being able to escape the smoke when it's this intense, it starts to create sort of a feeling of claustrophobia because you get headaches, you can't breathe properly, and so you just want to be able to get away, but you can't. There is no way to get away from the smoke. And so that, of course, raises levels of anxiety. So there's a lot of psychological issues that are also attached to that.
So clearly, air quality can affect us in many negative ways. You also mentioned in your comments that sometimes people evacuate and they don't have a home to go back to. And I can't imagine what that would feel like.
Yeah, and there's so many Canadians who have experienced that, whether it's in Jasper or, northern, other places in northern Alberta or in the Okanagan or Northwest Territories or Manitoba. I mean, it's really devastating. And there's a huge economic cost to that as well. And you have to imagine towns that are like Lytton that were completely destroyed. So it's not just that you've lost your home, you lost your entire community. And that is where you really find, it's very heartbreaking. And how do you rebuild? I've driven past Lytton since the fire, and it's just surrounded by gates at the moment with big signs saying, "Do not enter, it's toxic." And that used to be a town, a community, a place of gathering. And on top of that, so we have the forest fires, but there's other issues that tie on to that. So when those fires happened in 2021, you'll remember also that there was the floods in 2021 in BC, and that was because there was so many forest fires, the trees weren't there to suck up the water. And so we had massive flooding, and there was even more homes lost. So there's places that I've been in BC that not only were they ravaged by fire, so you can see all the trees that are burned, but then you see all the homes that are buried in mud and the trucks that are just buried in mud. So the towns get this double whammy. And so it's not just the cost of initially of the forest fire that happens, there's the knock-on effects that
And
happen
the
afterwards.
recovery and the social costs and the cost of the economy are tremendous.
And it's an environmental cost because now you've just released even more carbon into the air, and you don't have those trees to actually mitigate climate change. So it just becomes a positive feedback cycle where we are creating the conditions for a more warmer planet by releasing all this carbon, which causes the forest fire, which then releases more carbon, and it just
The
starts
closed
to
system and
accelerate.
it accelerates. I totally understand that. You explained that really clearly. And when you talk about Lytton, you mentioned to me as we were preparing for this conversation that that was a direct result of a heat dome. And I wonder if you could describe what a heat dome is.
Yeah, so a heat dome is basically when the air gets trapped, is like hot air and it's extremely, extremely hot. But the air doesn't move. And it's just like basically an extreme heat event. Now, when this happened in BC, it was so extreme that Lytton actually had the highest temperature ever recorded in the country at 49.2
Wow.
degrees. That was on the 29th of July, and the very next day the city burned
Wow.
down. Or the town burned down. It was a direct result of that heat. Now, there was another cost to this, which again, we need to think about when we've got our Great Lakes. When the heat dome happened, there was over 1 million sea creatures that died in the area. And that ended up creating toxic uh, water in the oceans around. So people couldn't go to the beaches.
Yeah, an environmental issue, and again, a big impact from a social issue perspective. So that happened in the town of Lytton in British Columbia. It was a terrible tragedy. Sounds like there are still consequences that are being experienced, negative consequences. What about London? Would London, a community like London, this size, be at risk to have something like that happen here, either in part or in whole?
Absolutely. This is the issue. This is why we need to start preparing ourselves for this changing climate that we are going to experience. That we have to really start both mitigating and adapting to climate change. We could absolutely experience a heat event that is that intense. We've already had these heat events, 5 of them this summer, that have been very intense. And it just takes going a few more degrees up that is going to cause like perhaps massive casualties that we're seeing in Vancouver and across Europe. The issue is that we're not prioritizing preparing people for this issue, and it is an equity issue. We've already talked about how it can affect those that are unhoused. The other issue is just for people that are living in homes that are not sufficient to actually address the climate crisis and the rise in heat, but it's also within the community. So one of the best ways to deal with these heat events is to have more green space and parks. We'll often find in low income areas there isn't as
Right.
much green space. So then those that are already living, likely without air conditioning or without any kind of filter system, are also not close to trees or plants. So their risk of health issues and perhaps mortality, they increase. So we do need to be prepared for that. I think often in London we have this idea that, the forest fires are out there or the effects of climate change are far away from us, and they're not. They're right here.
I guess we should consider that we do call ourselves the Forest City. So these are warning signs. You've made that very clear, and I think that sometimes what people are thinking is that climate change might affect the next generation or the generation after that, and you're making it really clear during this conversation that although it will, it's having really negative effects on a number of fronts for communities across the province, the country, around the world right now. And obviously, this is an issue that's going to require all levels of government, federal and provincial and municipal. So let's focus in on municipal right now. And just to give a brief snapshot in time, in 2019, the City Council of the day declared a climate emergency here in London. And then in 2022, London City Council launched a plan for the City of London, the corporation of the City of London, to be carbon neutral by 2050. This plan was slightly more aggressive than a federal plan that had been set a little while before that. And so I think it's important to understand how we're doing. And I'm going to share some numbers. Numbers don't always work on a podcast, but let's see if we can boil it down to its simplest terms. In 2016, just under 3 million tons of carbon dioxide were being produced, were being emitted by the corporation of the City of London in all of the work that they do, roads, snow removal, parks, etc. The 2030 target that was set by City Council in 2022 was 1,700,000 tons of carbon dioxide being emitted. So that would be a 60% reduction, leading a trajectory towards a 2050 carbon neutral environment. So how are we doing, right? I think that's a legitimate question. And today, it's actually just over 3 million tons of carbon that's being emitted. And so in 2016, it was just under 3 million, and in 2025, it's just over. So it's actually, if it's going in any direction, it's going up. The city isn't hitting the trajectory reductions that the council had set. for itself, and it's not even hitting the less aggressive trajectory that the federal government has set. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what advice would you give them?
Well, what I would say is we need to stop treating our environment and the climate health as a nice to have, but as an absolute priority. And we're not seeing that with the city council. It was great that they declared a climate emergency in 2019, but there really hasn't been a great follow up on that. And we see that number one because we already know, and we just found this out, I think 3 weeks or so ago, that we're not going to even hit our 2030 targets. That's not going to happen. And I could have predicted that that was going to happen because I'm not seeing the real will by city council to actually follow through. So we've had a great plan, but the follow through is lacking. And part of that is because, as with all things, and we've seen this in the provincial election and we've seen it in the federal election, the environment comes as a fourth and fifth priority when we are dealing with other issues. So, of course, it's all about tariffs right now, economy, without really recognizing that we have to actually take care of our environment for those issues. And we can see this for the city council because we had the budget and they were going to be putting in $1 million into the climate fund. And now they have dropped that
Which is
down,
like a reserve fund, is that right?
a reserve fund to deal with climate issues. And they've dropped that down to, I believe, $192,000 a year
So an
instead.
80% reduction.
An 80% reduction, which shows that they are not taking this issue seriously. They're not prioritizing it. And as we've already discussed in this podcast, the climate issue is not a standalone issue. It affects all areas of our lives, and it really affects the most vulnerable in our communities. It is a racial issue, it is a gender issue, it is an economic, social economic issue for the poorest in our
Yeah,
city.
you've made that really clear during our conversation that the environment, it's not just standalone, it's really connected to every part of our life. So I guess I want to just circle back to that reduction that you're talking about, the 80% reduction in the climate emergency reserve fund. We're, experiencing a city council, the current city council has introduced the largest tax increase that our community has seen this century and probably in the history of
Mhm.
the city of London. Uh, Looks like it's going to come in around a 30% increase over the course of the 4 years. So at the same time as we're seeing a record tax increase over the course of the 4 years, approximately a 30% tax increase for London residents. At the same time that that's happening, the funding that's being made available for environmental programs to reduce carbon emissions is going down.
Yeah. So it's incredibly disappointing and it's very short-sighted. We need to be working in the right direction to prepare for what's going to happen. So there's two different issues we need to be dealing with. One, of course, is mitigating climate change, and that means dropping our emissions. That means hitting our 2030 target, and that means hitting our 2050 target. Because when we do that, we're actually making our London environment more healthy and stronger going forward. But the other part of it is we have to adapt to the climate change that is going to happen. And that means we need to start having more trees, more green spaces, particularly in low income areas where that is absolutely necessary for people who don't have adequate housing. We need to be actually expanding things like bike lanes and other forms of active transportation. And yet we're seeing on a provincial level, and I believe also on a municipal level, a real antagonism towards those kinds of changes.
I had the privilege to serve on two councils, 2010 to 2014, and then to lead a council 2014 to 2018. And during that second term, we introduced rapid transit, and we're seeing that sort of come to fruition over a course of 10 years, which was the plan. Most of it. I mean, I know that the north leg was cut and the west leg was cut, and they're going to have to come back. But the reason why I'm focused in on that is Councillor Jesse Helmer at the time was really focused on electric buses and to electrify the transit service. And I guess that would be sort of you get more bang for your buck in that way in terms of environmental mitigation strategies. Because not only are you allowing people to make the decision to leave their car at home on some of their trips and take transit, but you're also providing transit that
Exactly.
isn't emitting
And
carbon.
what we're just seeing at the moment is that there is this pushback against such things as electrification and more public transportation. And the problem with that is that we are just, again, contributing more to the problem. And this antipathy towards, climate solutions is very bizarre when you imagine that actually for every bit of money that we invest into climate action, whether it's public transportation, other areas, there is a huge payback. We actually save a huge amount of taxpayer dollars if we actually invest in these kind of climate mitigation and climate adaptation policies. So it's extremely short-sighted because we know the problem's going to get worse. Not only is the problem happening right now, but it is going to expand. And if you care at all for the children of the future, your children, your grandchildren, we need to be making those investments now. So to not put money into the climate reserve fund is it's really cheating the kids that are coming forward, and how they're going to be able to adapt to this problem. And it's really not addressing priorities in the correct way because, as they said, we're not going to put this money into that fund because there's competing priorities or there's other things that we have to deal with. But as I've tried to point out over and over again, you have nothing if you do not have a healthy environment, if you are not actually ensuring that people have clean air to breathe, clean water, if they are able to adapt to these heat events and better still prevent the heat events, then we're actually going to see a greater return on our money in other areas.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm sure it applies here as well. You either pay now or you pay later, and when you end up making investments later, it actually costs more. And I think your theme today in the conversation that we've been having is that it doesn't just cost dollars and cents, right? This has real significant, important negative effects on us as individuals and as a community. This has been a pretty heavy topic. We've been talking about something that's happening now and that's going to have negative effects today and tomorrow, and that if things aren't done differently moving forward, it's going to have effects for generations to come. And I think that when we give our listeners this kind of information, it's also important for them to know what they could do. And maybe if I can break it into two categories, maybe there's somebody out there that's thinking, you know what, I want to run for a future council, and what could they do in their campaign? What should they do in their mandate? And that's a very small number of individuals who want to run for office. I know that we belong to a very small club, you and I, Carol, and there's a whole community of Londoners out there that they don't want to do something like that, but maybe they're motivated to make small changes or to make a difference. So what could they do in this community?
Well, I will say one thing in that London is incredibly lucky to have a lot of very dedicated individuals and organizations within the city. And I've been very fortunate over the past decade plus to be a part of those organizations. So there are great groups doing work in London. And so if you're looking for ways to volunteer, for instance, we have places like the London Environmental Network. We have places that are dealing with planting native species like pollinator pathways. We have the Thames Talbot Land Trust, because protecting our wetlands and the agricultural land, forest land around us plays a huge part in mitigating climate change and also adapting to climate change. So I always say, like, if you're looking for something that makes you feel good and you're actually helping, there are so many opportunities in the city. But even in your own property, plant some trees. They will help reduce the heat on your home. It will help deal with any kind of massive heat event, but also it creates great areas for wildlife. Your gardens, try to plant native species as much as possible. There's lots of great nurseries all over London that are now recognizing the importance of planting native species, which are more resistant to drought and climate change, and they are better for supporting species that we love, like butterflies and birds. Um, Now, if you're going to run for city council, I would love to see some more councillors that are coming on board that are recognizing that the climate is not a fringe issue in our politics. It simply is not. It is something that affects every aspect of our lives. And so, reach out to people, try to get that message across. I know how difficult it is. I've tried 5 times to get that message across. Um, but we need to prioritize things like our public transportation and more green spaces and planting trees and finding ways to make our community more livable as we are going into these situations where we're having extreme weather events like these heat events that we've been having. Because we do know that they have economic consequences as well. I mean, when businesses shut down because there's no power, that has huge implications. So, if you're thinking about it, run for council and prioritize the environment. We need more of those voices on city council.
Yeah, and I guess every single one of us has the ability to connect with our councillor, to connect with the current mayor, to connect with leaders from other levels of government, just to express our feelings, how we feel about something. And if a listener has learned something on this podcast and they feel that they want to share that, I can tell you just with firsthand experience that local politicians read every single communication that they receive and they respond to as many as they possibly can. These folks are working really hard on behalf of our community, and something that really helps guide decision making is feedback. And so I'd encourage anyone to do that. Local government is the most accessible level of government, and I wouldn't be surprised if you get a reply from your councillor.
Absolutely. And when big decisions are being made, and if you feel like they're not prioritizing issues that you think are important, such as cutting the Climate Reserve Fund by 80%, reach out to your councillor, reach out to the mayor, and let them know that you believe that we need to start prioritizing these issues because it does matter for now and for our future generations.
Great, Carol. I think that's a great spot to leave it. Time isn't our friend, and we've come to the end of the time that we set aside to have this conversation. And it's been great. It's been great having you on the show. I just want to ask you one final question. Is there anything you wish that I had have asked or that you wanted to talk about and you haven't had the opportunity?
No, I think we basically covered everything. If it were up to me, I could talk about this topic for hours. So we
In
better cut it
fact,
short.
you have. You've proven that at least 5 times, actually, in the 5 elections that you've run. And so I'd like to say to every candidate who puts their name forward for public office, thank you for the courage and thank you for the willingness to do that. It's not easy. You've been through elections, I think, in the dead of winter and in the heat of summer, and it's something that you're clearly passionate about and knowledgeable about because that's why you're here today and that's why you've made that commitment to the London community. So thanks for today and thanks for your service.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And we'll be right back.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe, home of family cargo and urban cycling. Test ride an e-bike along riverside trails to see how easy moving through our city can really be. London Bicycle Cafe at the forks of the Thames. See you soon.
So that's the show. I hope you know a little bit more about heat domes, heat waves, and the real-time consequences of climate change that we're experiencing right here in London, across the country, and around the world. Like I always say, this podcast is for you. It's about all things local, and maybe some other stuff too. Maybe you have an idea for the show, something you'd like me to cover. Maybe you're doing something here in London that you want others to know about. If so, send me an email to the mattbrownpodcast@gmail.com. You can make your pitch. And thank you to all of you who've already reached out and done something like that. In fact, the last 2 episodes are a direct result of someone reaching out to me and letting me know they wanted to be on the show. They wanted to tell their story. The podcast is catching on. There have been almost 500 downloads of the first 2 episodes, and the numbers are growing every day. Early on, some of you let me know that you couldn't find or follow the Matt Brown Podcast where you normally get your podcasts. I can assure you that that's been fixed, so please subscribe and tell your friends. This is truly a work in progress, but I have to say, I am really enjoying it. A reminder as well that beginning in the fall, I'll be hosting Newsmakers on Rogers Channel 13. We'll be taping twice monthly. I'll be interviewing newsmakers of the day or the month. The conversations will be 15 or 30 minutes long, And this longer format will allow us to dig a little deeper to develop a better understanding of whatever the issue of the day is. Portions of Newsmakers will also be replayed right here on the Matt Brown podcast. I'd like to thank Carol Dyck for joining us this week, and I can tell you that there will be at least one more episode posted this summer. It's a topic I'm really looking forward to. Jim Graham is joining us to talk all things air show and what he's got in store for us this year. So with that, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and please share this episode on your social media and tell your friends. Until the next time, bye for now, and thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon, London.